Hey guys, I'm Stephan Kesting. This is Rob Bernacki, and welcome to Smashing the Younger, Fitter, More Athletic Opponent, or the alternate title,
BJJ for old fucks.
Cool.
You might be an old fuck like me, or you might be fucking old like Stephan. But either way, this series is for you.
Yeah, we'll have to count the number of combined surgeries that we've had and injuries that we've had. So, what is different about training jiu-jitsu if you're older? And we'll draw an imaginary line in the sand, call it, I don't know, late 30s, 40s?
Yeah, I'd say 40 is probably when you're old. You're officially an old fuck when you're 40.
Okay.
Well, two things mainly, which is training volume. At least training volume, assuming that you want to be able to sustain it, starts to decrease dramatically. And in general, flexibility and your body's responsiveness to injuries and the healing rate starts to become a real problem. So you can't train as hard, you can't train as often, and your body stops doing the shit that it used to be able to do.
So you can't train as often, you can't train as hard, not because you can't train hard.
No, but just you pay for it. You're not going to recover fully. Yeah.
To be 19 again when one night's sleep and you were fully recovered.
Exactly. So when we talk about training limits, we're trying to think about how we can progress in an efficient fashion, which is a running theme throughout all my work, right? Like we've got a lot of, and we'll be talking about, spoiler alert, fuck your jiu-jitsu later on, and how we can maximize our training methodology and how we can develop as much as possible within a given amount of time. But we also want to talk about, and we're going to talk about training limits, because our body is not as capable of recovery, because we don't have the same amount of time to explore every possible option. If you're in your 20s and you want to learn rubber guard, your knees are going to recover. If you're in your 40s and you want to learn rubber guard, your knees are not going to recover, and you're much less likely to even have the flexibility to begin the process at all. So what we're trying to do is, when we talk about training limitations, we want to limit you to certain techniques that are as maximally effective in a, I don't want to say old school jiu-jitsu way, because like old school jiu-jitsu to me is the code for shitty jiu-jitsu for the most part. But there is the idea of the idea of holding someone in half guard, holding someone in closed guard, which is a bit more of an old school thing versus playing a lot of open guards and Delhi heave and all that kind of stuff, does have some validity. Focusing on, and we'll be talking later on in this set on which guards to focus on, which passing to focus on. But those are some of the training limitations. We want to think about how can we select for techniques that are still high percentage at the high level, but don't require a ton of explosiveness, a ton of athleticism, a ton of flexibility, basically attributes that younger people tend to have. And how can we still develop a really robust game that works on younger people, because it's going to be used across the board. Like when the stuff that we're talking about isn't just jiu-jitsu for old people. It can be jiu-jitsu for young people. Young people could use this stuff just as much, because we're not going to give you a compromised set of techniques. So the limitation is not on the effectiveness of the technique. It's that there are certain techniques, certain groups of techniques, certain types of games that you can focus on that will allow you to be incredibly effective while taking into account for limited training, limited recovery, et cetera, et cetera.
So it's a sort of an 80-20 analysis of an 80-20 situation.
That's exactly it. Yeah, so we'll talk about safety in executing a technique, safety in receiving a technique. We'll talk about what parts of the jiu-jitsu game will maximize your results, like the return on investment on something like hand fighting and distance management versus the return on investment on berimbolo if you're 45. It's not that it's not worth it at all, but depending on who you are and what your physicality is, it may not be worth it at all. Base is not an on-off switch. It's not like I have base or I have no base. It's a gradient. I can have a little bit of base, I can have some base, I can have decent base, et cetera, but ultimately we want to make sure that we have as much base as possible. So again, we have that potential for maximal force generation and the ability to receive.
It's all about that base.
It's all about that base. So that's the foundation of our alignment. Again, as that relates to being an older grappler, if you don't have good base and you spend a lot of time falling down, you're going to get hurt more. You're going to recover less. If you don't have good base and even if it's not a matter of injury, even if it's just a matter of you having to fight back to your feet or have to fight for position because your base is compromised, you're at an athletic disadvantage, you will probably be at a cardio disadvantage. All of these things are going to cost you so much more as you get older. So, starting with base, you got to have it. Posture is the integrity of your spinal column. Doesn't mean you have to have your spine perfectly straight, but it does mean that we want to avoid overly bending or twisting our spine. Obviously in jiu-jitsu, we roll, so we do need a curve in our spine. What we want is a natural curve that our body is affording us the ability to move about. Again, support weight, support force in different directions. A good example of bad posture, even though my spine is straight, would be hips completely turned one way, shoulders completely turned the other way. That would be a very weak position because it prevents all of our muscles from working together. Our core, ideally, is going to be working with our extremities to make us, again, as strong as possible, the idea of maximum force generation. When I overly bend or twist my spine, let's say my head is really turned this way, the muscles in my core, the muscles around my spine are forced to kind of overprotect, and they're not really available for working with the rest of the muscles. Kinetic linking, the kinetic chain is what we're talking about.
I know we're going to get into structure here in a second, but I think when people hear maximal force production, especially in the context of the audience that we're talking to, they're not like, what the hell? I'm 50 years old. Why should I be doing maximum force? Why should I be doing maximum effort? So I think you might need to clarify that it's about efficiently producing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we will talk about efficiency more in the structure segment, but part of the definition that we give for structure is the idea that whenever possible, we use bone instead of muscle. So we're not trying to tell you to use maximum force all the time, but we are telling you that you may need to absorb maximal force. Yeah. So your body needs to be efficiently positioned to do things so that you're using as little force as you actually need to get the job done.
Because a 20-year-old steroid monkey may just leap on you.
Exactly. So if I'm relying on my leg at this angle to absorb all of your body weight, oh god, and again, as a younger person, that's something that wouldn't even bother you. I've got students at my gym that you could literally drop 100 pounds on their leg and it would just go to their chest and wouldn't bother them. If you did that to me, every single ligament and tendon in my knee would explode. So the fact that you are able to absorb, that you are able to do these things under certain circumstances doesn't make it right, because you're not efficiently positioning your body. You're going to have to overutilize, whether it's strength, whether it's flexibility, or whatever, and over a long enough time scale, that becomes unsafe. Even people who are very flexible are better off not abusing it, because no matter how flexible you are, there's still a limit to how many times your knee can get wrenched sideways. So yeah, when we talk about posture, we want to make sure that we're recognizing that I'm not advising you to full maximum, full send every single thing you do, but just have the ability to do it if you need to. And B, if you have good alignment, you will be using less of your potential for generating force to achieve any number of things. So that brings us to structure. Structure is the efficient positioning of our limbs to achieve a goal. I always give the example of holding a push-up position. If my goal is to hold a push-up position, this is good structure because my bones are supporting my weight. My elbows are locked out, and I'm just using the my skeletal structure to support me. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to achieve the goal. I can hold a push-up position like this. This is actually quite easy for me. I'm relatively strong, but I am fatiguing, and I will definitely fatigue and fail much, much faster doing this than I will doing this. So structure doesn't mean you can't, and none of these things, whether it's base, whether it's posture, whether it's structure, none of these things mean that you can't do it without optimizing your base, your posture, your structure. What it means is you're going to be struggling a lot more to do it. So if you're a really strong person, having bad structure, it doesn't cost you that much. We all have the 250-pound guy in our gym who just key locks everybody, and they don't have to have good structure. They can literally bench press you off of them, and they will absolutely get away with it until they roll with somebody who weighs 300 pounds, and then they can't. So that's the whole point of whether it's base or posture or structure, is in the absence of an overwhelming physical advantage, these things allow me to get the job done against somebody who is bigger, stronger, faster, younger, fitter, etc., etc., etc. And so as we age, these elements become much more important, both from a physical deficit, strength deficit, a flexibility deficit, a cardio deficit, any of these things, and most importantly, a health and safety deficit. Things that will not result in injury when you're 30 will definitely result in injury when you're 40 if you don't have good alignment. Alignment is it's a force magnifier. It allows us to transfer more force into an opponent, like we'll talk about levers later, which those do that very effectively, but it allows us to just be more effective with force production. But more so than that, from a longevity perspective, good alignment allows us to stay safe when we're rolling, especially with more explosive people who are jumping around trying to do crazy crap. If you're always concerned with your alignment first, and then concerned with your opponent's alignment and how to take it away from them, that athleticism advantage of a younger person starts to become at least diminished, if not eliminated, if you're effective enough. Frames are weight bearing. So for instance, if I have my foot like this, yeah, I'm supporting my weight a little bit, but Stephan, if you pick my leg up, whoa, that's actually a lever. Whereas if I go like that, it should be pretty difficult for you to move my leg. So if I've got enough weight over a frame that it's bearing that weight in such a way that you can't move me, I've got a good frame. If I start to lighten that load, where most of my weight is now being borne by my right leg, this starts to become a lever. So the main dynamic that we have in jiu-jitsu is actually the frame-lever dynamic, where I want to utilize frames against my opponent to support their weight to keep them off me. I want to utilize levers against my opponent to manipulate them, to move their arms, their legs, and their spine to create a break in their alignment, whether it's their base. Usually we affect base by moving the legs. Usually we affect structure by moving the arms, and usually we affect posture by moving the spine. All of those things will be generally lever attacks that we're utilizing. So we're trying to change frames into levers, change levers into frames, or deny our opponent access to frames or levers. And by doing that, we affect our opponent's alignment, their base, their posture, and structure, giving us a mechanical advantage. So we don't need an athletic advantage. We don't need a strength, flexibility, speed advantage. We just need a mechanical advantage that we can reliably replicate. And that's what we're doing when we do jiu-jitsu. So the moves plug into that, but that's not really what it's about. It's about understanding my body needs to be strong, my opponent's body needs to be weak, and that's how I do it. All right, let's talk a little bit about flexibility, or lack thereof, which is really the most important aspect of this particular series. I know that Rubber Guard is our resident whipping boy, as it is for the jiu-jitsu community in general, for like what happens when flexibility is overly prized. But it should go without saying that as an older grappler, you shouldn't try to get the job done with flexibility. Anything that requires you to be pulling on your knee, trying to stick your leg behind your head. Same goes for shoulder flexibility, elbow flexibility. Resisting anything with flexibility, especially at our age, is, if I'm allowed to prohibit you from doing it, it's verboten. Don't do it. The safety factor, the safety limit of if you hurt yourself, you're just not going to recover that quickly makes it not worth it.
So I know that you used to study Rubber Guard.
Yeah, I studied. I think most grapplers, especially like in the 2000s, who wanted a shortcut, studied Rubber Guard.
And why'd you stop?
I hurt my knee.
So I can testify to the same thing. I used to be quite flexible. I used to work on a lot, did a lot of yoga, was able to put both, well, not at the same time, but both legs behind my head.
Yep.
And I still remember the crowbar I was going for with good alignment, and then pop, 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 pop. The outside of the knee popped, the LCL tore. And I think I was out for 6 months. So
yeah,
it's a very common story.
It's a very common story, and it's not the only, we pick on Rubber Guard because, anyway. But there are other movements in jiu-jitsu that are prohibitive for older grapplers because of the flexibility requirement. Obviously, we're not going to show you any of those, but just as a guideline, if you're fairly new and you're looking to develop a game as an older grappler, anything that involves this shape, pulling your foot towards you while there's external rotation on your hip, is going to be a huge risk. Anything that involves trying to bring your leg behind your head is going to be a risk. And then obviously the stuff like, kimuras and omoplatas, submissions where your arm is being twisted behind your back. That's a submission, so you should be tapping to that. But
what about inversions?
So inversions. So anything where I'm putting a bunch of weight on the back of my neck is going to be a real problem.
I still do them.
I personally invert quite a bit, so I don't want this to become but Rob, I've seen you. But I am also quite flexible. I can invert fully without my head touching the ground. So that is a consequence of hamstring flexibility. And all we're saying is, if you're not already quite flexible, don't try to find out. right? Like if your body, if you're 48 and you've been doing yoga for 30 years and you're super bendy, go ahead and invert all over the place. You're not going to have any problems. Inversion is based on your hamstring flexibility, not your neck flexibility. You should never be trying to figure out how flexible your neck actually is with human weight on it or any weight on it. So yeah, we're not advocating that. We're just saying that as an older grappler, particularly in the development phase, when you're learning new things, do not try to figure out if you can pull on your own knee. Do not try to figure out if someone can stack you and stick your leg all the way to the ground. Do not try to figure out how far your arm goes behind your back before you
counter to all that stuff.
You tap, exactly. And tapping, this is something that I talk about in the intro sessions for my new students. Tapping is not just a form of surrender to submissions. I think that's a misapprehension that new people have when they start jiu-jitsu, is they're told that, hey, you get caught in an armbar, you tap. It's a sign of, it's literally saying, I give up. No, tap is, I don't know if I'm safe. That's what we're signaling when we tap. So I tell my new students, tap to cross fist pressure. Tap to somebody's weight being on your ribs. Tap to you're twisted up and you don't feel quite safe and you're not sure. As a beginner, and again, I would tell this to a 20-year-old beginner, but to a 40-year-old beginner, for fuck's sake, if you're not sure that your body is safe, you tap. Tap with authority, say tap, whatever it takes. Hopefully you're at a gym or an academy or a club, whatever, where that's not something that's going to get you called a pussy. Because those gyms do exist. Like, that wasn't a submission, why are you tapping? Probably a red flag. Maybe don't train at that gym because your safety is your number one priority. Your body, your training partner's body. Those are the toys. If you break your toys, you can't play with them. You're certainly not going to get good at jiu-jitsu if you're broken. So do not rely on flexibility. Do not test your flexibility. Do not try to discover where your limits are when it comes to submissions, when it comes to movement. Make sure that, referring back to the alignment, you always have your limbs, your structure in good position before attempting to execute anything. All right, now let's talk about reducing unnecessary movement. And this is something that has, again, a lot of sort of practical implications for us as older grapplers. When we reduce unnecessary movement, we're reducing the chance for injury. We're also reducing the cardiovascular demand on our body, and we're reducing the cognitive load on our brain, which is old and ossified from years of watching pornography. It just means we can't store as much information, at least new information, as we used to be able to. So I'll give a couple of examples. If I'm playing guard, for instance, and I'm using a lasso, and then I'm inverting, and then I'm doing some other stuff, I'm continuing, and eventually I sweep you, and then I get on your back. These things are all cool, and they're fun, and if you're a younger grappler, you go ahead and do it. But as an older grappler, what I'm more looking to do is tripod sweep. We want to keep our movements relatively simple, and the same thing goes for as a top player. We're going to be talking about passing wise. Sure, I can use all this lateral movement, I can cross step, and it's all cool and it's all fun, but the cardiovascular demand, the odds that I fall and hurt my old ass, all of that stuff, they increase dramatically. So all the stuff we're going to be talking about in this series is going to be reducing unnecessary movement on our part, because we're old and fragile, and the more movement we put our body through, the greater the toll. We just have to count on being as efficient as possible to reduce the overall toll on our body, both in terms of training volume, in terms of days a week, also in terms of training intensity, in terms of how hard you roll, how many rolls you do, but also in terms of during the roll, what are we actually doing? How much are we trying to cartwheel guard past somebody, or are we trying to just stay fairly efficient, maximally efficient, and just get the job done with the minimal amount of input? Obviously, we can be kind of cartoonish. I'm not going to move at all. But as long as we're just not looking to do overly elaborate things that unnecessarily fatigue us or put us at risk of injury, it's going to maximize your development. And just in terms of, again, that cognitive load thing, simplicity allows you for just a better toolbox. You can learn one 20-step thing, or you can learn 20 one-step things. And you're going to have 20 tools in your kit rather than one. So as long as we keep things fairly simple, keep the movement to a minimum, we should be safer, we should be able to learn more effectively, and we should be able to apply more effectively, which is really what we're all after. The flip side of this is that we want to limit our opponent's movement. So the fact...
I'm not trying to help them out, though.
Yeah, exactly. Not in the interest of helping them, but in the interest of us not having to deal with a whirling dervish on top, moving all over the place. So we are going to be talking about more clamp style guards, more so like just don't have the BJJ formula. I mean, get it. But we talk about the different types of guards where we talk about hook-based, frame-based, clamp-based, and then hybrid guards. So a hook-based guard would just be, me using hooks. A frame-based guard would be just using frames. A hook and frame-based guard, if I've got, would be a hybrid. And then a clamp-based guard, if I get you to come down to your knees, would be something like a half guard, where I cross my ankles, or the old closed guard, where I cross my ankles, or I'm utilizing some form of clamp where I affix myself around my partner in such a way that they can't move easily independently. They don't have to be clamp-based. The limitation of a clamp-based guard is my mobility is compromised, and as much as I did just say, I'm old, I don't want to move very much. The thing is, when I do need to move as a mobility impaired grappler, I need a little bit more of an affordance for my movement. So I'm not trying to say just use the closed guard. In fact, when we do get to the guards, the closed guard is the last one we're going to utilize. But we just want to have a guard that allows us to prevent our opponent's retreat and advance. So even something as simple as just using a half butterfly guard, where I've got a hook on my partner's bottom leg, and I've got a hook here. He can't easily run away. He can't easily come forward. I'm quite attached to him. In the gi, even something like the lasso. Not that we're going to be getting into the lasso very much, but like this is a pretty simple way of just like, I'm attached to you. Yeah. You're not going anywhere, and I'm actually able to be quite obnoxious with it. So the objective is to limit our opponent's ability to move dramatically. We will be talking quite a bit about the engagement phase and about hand fighting and about not accepting an inferior position. So when somebody can move around a lot in open space, that's not a concern, right? Like if you're standing and you're like way back there, I don't really care. Like you can move around all you want. You're just burning energy. The objective is that if you're close to me, you shouldn't be able to move around a whole bunch, because that's when you can be quite threatening to me. If we have exchanges of movement, things like rolling submission attempts, rolling kimuras, rolling guillotines, rolling guard passes or submission-based guard passes, explosive knee cuts, things where somebody can apply a sudden change in tempo where they are going a little bit slow and then all of a sudden going very fast. If I'm in a range where that's a possibility, I want to try to make sure that you can't move quickly, or if you do start to move quickly, you're going to go off balance, and that's going to largely be based around my ability to hand fight, around my ability to do kuzushi, manage the distance, keep good frames, keep myself in good alignment. So everything we do in this series is going to be based around that idea. I should try to move as little as possible, but I should also try to limit your options as far as explosive movement when it matters. When it doesn't matter, go nuts, do backflips. I don't care. The objective is to just recognize that both as the guard player and as the passer, I have a preferred range. And if I get that range and I get that grip and I get that control, I have the distance that I want and you don't. If you get it, you have the distance that you want and I don't, which means I shouldn't be trying to attack you. God help me. I should not even be staying put. I need to retreat. And retreat doesn't always literally mean physically go backwards, but it does mean that I need to break a grip, I need to move, I need to do something, I can adjust an angle, I can do something that negates your advantage. I always want to have something in between us that's keeping me safe if I'm a guard player. And as a passer, I want nothing in between us that's keeping the guard player safe. So that's going to be a constant exchange that we're going to have. We talked about the frame lever dynamic. That's really where it's going to come into play quite a bit. As the guard player, I'm going to be wanting to put layers of frames, and just to cover it quickly, assuming that I'm playing from my back, which we're going to discuss a little bit later on why this is not the best idea as an older person, just because the flexibility and dexterity and movement requirement is higher on a recumbent guard player than it is on a seated guard player. But just for demonstration purposes, the soles of my feet would be the farthest range. My instep, the instep here, the shoelaces as they're called, would be another range. My shin, kind of knee area, would be another range. Then the end of my hand here, that kind of part that we would land on or in that earlier demonstration, would be a range. The heel of my palm would be another range. My elbow would be another range. My shoulder would actually come up on an underhook would be another range. I can use my head as a frame, right? If I'm playing seated guard, I'm no longer afforded the luxury of using my feet, my legs as much as frames. But if you're standing, I can actually still use that longest range frame, which is the sole of my foot. So even as a seated guard player, as long as I'm not playing the like super bendy seated butterfly or like a seated lotus position almost kind of guard, as long as I'm like this, I can still use this very long range frame. I can use my shin and instep quite a bit. To a lesser degree, we'll be using our knee, but those ranges, those frames still afford us quite a bit of range. And then, my hands, my elbow, my underhook, my head, all those same frames are going to come into play as a guard player for managing the distance. And I never want to just allow the passer to remove one of those for free. And if they do remove them, I want to replace one right away. So as long as I'm managing that distance, I'm going to be as safe as possible. And then we just reverse engineer that from the top. As the top player, I don't want a bunch of frames in my way and then be trying to pass your guard. Especially as an older, cardio-limited grappler, I don't have the luxury of running around you, jumping up and down, moving all around, and then hoping that you just give up and let me pass your guard. What I'm going to have to do is recognize what the frames are in my way, get them out of my way, and then move into a pass or draw a reaction where you move those frames out of my way and then I move into a pass. So this is all the same stuff that would be still tactically sound and that we would be emphasizing if you weren't old as fuck and broken and useless, but you are old as fuck and broken and useless. So these things are they're the bar. Like you cannot go below it. As a athletic person, those things are tactically sound and will help you. As an older person, these are a necessity. They're the floor. If you don't have these things, somebody quicker, younger, fitter will just cut right through you. So we have to have the distance management. We have to understand the engagement phase. We have to win it with our hand fighting, with our grip fighting, or with our leg pummeling. And if we don't, we move away and we start the battle again on more favorable terms. We don't continue to do jiu-jitsu with somebody who's beating us with a tactical advantage and a physical advantage. Obviously, that's a bad idea. But again, not a lot of people train this. Not a lot of people understand it. At least not a lot of people who don't compete. Everyone who competes knows this stuff. But if you're a hobbyist, you don't compete very much, chances are, I certainly have had people come into my gym that have been training for half a decade that had no idea that this was a thing. They've always just agreed to grips, and then they wonder why they get their ass kicked. So now you know, let's try to keep it from happening anymore.
So I think some people are thinking here, Rob was talking about grips, but I think and they're thinking that means just gi.
No, yeah,
100%.
Definitely not. It applies to no gi, right? We've got, we'll get into it, but we've got a sleeve grip, which means we've got a wrist grip. If we've got a collar grip, it means we've got a collar tie. All of these things are transferable, gi and no gi, and we aren't even just talking about gripping. We're talking about interference, especially as a guard player. I want as many things in your way. And ideally, and we'll talk about dominant angles and all that kind of stuff in more detail. But the idea is that I should have as many layers between my my body,
even
my
right now,
hips.
You've got layers.
I've got layers. The way I'm sitting, I don't trust this guy. Look at that mustache. So he's got nefarious intent. I'm not just like, yeah, hey man, right? I want to make sure that I've got stuff in the way so that at the very least I've got some warning that my defenses are about to fail, and I can supplement them with other frames, because I should have a reserve of frames or a brace of frames that's so overwhelming. If I use the example of the half guard shell, which I use quite a bit, I've got my knee and my shin and my elbow and my hand and my other hand in your way. It's going to be really difficult for you to launch an overwhelming assault that will just break through all of that defense. You're going to have to go at it bit by bit, and every time you do, I'll have an off balance for you. We'll talk about that later on, but I'll have something that allows me to buy time and recover to a stronger position every time one of those positions gets beat.
Okay, Rob, so after they finish watching this whole thing, they should just put in as many rounds of hard training as possible. Just got to get those rounds in. Train.
Just keep showing up. That's the only way to get good at jiu-jitsu. There's definitely no more efficient pathway. Obviously, if you've got any of my previous work, you've heard the term "fuck your jiu-jitsu." Fuck your jiu-jitsu is a dedicated sort of positional situational sparring, a proprietary method that we use at our academy that I teach in all of my instructionals. It's based around creating a limitation on one of the participants so that the other participant can fearlessly get through as many iterations, as many reps in a live environment with a resisting opponent. So like obviously jiu-jitsu only works because we're doing this stuff. We're testing it, we're pressure testing it live against resisting opponents. But during a roll, if the focus is entirely on I'm trying to win rather than I'm trying to develop, it obviously is very hard to develop. And sometimes it actually be very hard to win, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's better than you, younger than you, faster than you, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to develop whatever we're working on, whether it's some of the hand fighting stuff, whether it's some of the guard play, whether it's some of the passing, through these rounds where you do fuck your jiu-jitsu with your partner. So an example of how this would work would be for Stephan, if he's trying to develop his passing and I'm trying to develop my guard retention. If we just roll and he wants to pass my guard and I want to not let him pass my guard, I'm definitely just going to play my best hand fighting, range management kind of stuff and just not let him get any grips on me, because that's going to increase my chances of winning and not having him pass my guard. But if I'm just like, yeah, all right, well, go ahead, try to pass my guard, and then he starts passing, and then he's allowed grips, but I'm not, because if I just want to stop him, well, I'll stop him right away. But if I'm just trying to deal with his passing and reset my guard every time, then I'm going to get a lot of work in on the specific skill of defending guard passes with efficient guard retention movements. Whereas Stephan doesn't have to worry about getting submitted, getting swept. He just has to worry about responding to the cues that I'm giving. The responses that he's creating through his passing attempts are going to be guard retention movements on my part, which he can then practice timing those responses to get to his next passing movement and to actually solidify the pass. Whereas again, I'm only working on defending the guard. We can create versions of this for anything, right? We create a limitation on one participant. In this case, for me, I'm not allowed to attack with the guard. We do quite a bit of the flip side, which is Stephan's not allowed to attack me with passing. He's not allowed to run away. I get to try and sweep him. So we call that fuck your jiu-jitsu sweeping. You can just devise strategies like this for anything that you're trying to develop. And when you roll, you can, even if you're not at a gym where, because like I get visitors, we have a visiting student program at our academy. One of the questions I get a lot is, we don't do fuck your jiu-jitsu at my gym. It's really tough to just grab somebody and be like, hey, let's do this. Well, you can still do a lot of it just by rolling for development. So like fuck your jiu-jitsu is important. Training for development, rolling for development is also very important. Particularly as an older grappler, if you aren't already over winning and training, get over it in a hurry, because you are absolutely going to get injured more often if that is your goal. If your goal is to win in training, you're going to get fucked up. It's just like everybody's younger than you, everybody's fitter than you. Most of the people in the gym are going to be better than you if you're starting out. So you don't have any leg up. You don't have any means by which you can actually win other than by sacrificing your broken ass old body. So don't do it. Develop or really fall in love with the idea that this is a practice that we're doing to develop our minds, develop our bodies, develop our skills. And if you approach every role with the mentality of, I'm working on something, and maybe you're working on hand fighting, so do a lot of hand fighting in that round. Maybe your hand fighting is already really good. You spent quite a bit of time working on some of the stuff we're going to talk about shortly, and you're now able to dominate that hand fighting phase so much with most of the people you roll with that that's no longer the thing that you're developing. At that point, if you only use that, then you're wasting time with your rounds. You should start working on the next phase. You should start working on retention. You should start working on certain passing things. You should start working on developing better base in certain positions, allowing people to get grips on you, and then working within the framework of their offense, of their guard maintenance phase, their sweeping and stuff like that. There's always something you can pick to work on during a roll and focus on during a roll that will maximize your development. And so the people that I know that improve the fastest are the people that do a lot of rounds like this and that don't actually spend all that much time worried about whether they won or lost a roll.
It's the point that we've made before in previous instructionals. if I come into this and I'm like, I'm going to work on guard passing, and we're just going to fight, you got to vote too. I'm going to work on guard passing, and you're going to sweep me, and you're going to crush me, and we're going to spend the next 3 minutes here, and maybe I get out, or maybe you choke me silly, and that's the end of the round.
Yeah.
I have one attempt
at a guard
of guard passing, and how much, I got 1 rep. Whereas if we constrain it, then
exactly. The term is actually constraints-based learning. That's the academic term for what we're utilizing here. Yeah, we give you the opportunity.
Yeah. So I'll get 30, 40, 50 reps in, as opposed to 1.
And from the going back to that 80-20 analysis we talked about, the majority of what you're doing in jiu-jitsu is passing and guard retention and attempting to like sweep people, attack people from the guard. Once you get outside of that, you being old, them being young, that matters a lot less. Like if I'm mounting you, I'm 40 and you're 20, you being 20 matters a lot less, and me being 40 matters a lot less, because I'm already kicking your ass. I don't have to compensate for as much. Where it matters a lot is in the guard play, in the passing, and in the solidifying positions. Obviously, as a bit of an older grappler, there's certain submissions that I'm probably going to want to focus on a little bit more, ones that don't involve me bending my legs as much, all that kind of stuff. That's quite true. But if you spend a fair bit of time developing your ability to have that engagement phase, have the guard and passing exchanges be quite well developed on your part, you've got answers for a lot of these things that work in spite of your physical limitations as an older grappler. You're going to be effective. You're going to be effective against older grapplers. You're going to be effective against younger grapplers. The only way to do that is to do these rounds. You're not going to get, especially as a beginner, you're just not going to get the opportunity to develop those things when somebody's just cutting through your guard over and over again. And just, you spend the entire time defending bottom side control and back and all that kind of stuff. And your defense gets really good, but I've got a whole rant about people who think their defense is good because all they're doing is shelling up and not moving. I'm sorry, that's not good defense. There's tons of people that think that. We are literally born with the ability to isometrically contract our muscles. Doing the fetal position is not good jiu-jitsu. And there's tons, especially if you're old and you've got the fabled old man strength, which is eluding me, and I'm starting to feel a bit ripped off about this. But there are people at my gym that are, they're 50, and if they lock their arms, it is goddamn impossible to move their arms from their body. And some people seem to think that that's excellent defense. It's only excellent defense if you're stronger than the other person. Once you go up against somebody who actually has either quite superior technique or a little bit of horsepower on you, your ability to glue your arms to your body, it's no longer relevant. So it's something that I discourage people to worry about and think about. Having the skill that you want be the skill of movement. Even if we're being lazy, even if we're being efficient, we're still moving our bodies in a way that's advancing our position. Just going isometric and fetal is not actually good jiu-jitsu on any level.